This is a seascape painting of Cornwall based on a sketch I have done on the spot. As you can see, I'm working on a previously painted canvas that I have painted over, gessoed over, so I will have to use the textures of the previous painting and I will incorporate them into my new artwork. Now, what you see on my hand is three colors. One is a golden yellow, that's a fairly transparent color. The other is a deep cadmium red, and the third one is a phthalo blue. I will be just working with these three colors to start with, and as you see, at first I'm just getting rid of the white of the canvas, and at the same time, with a mixture of the yellow and the red, I'm slowly sketching out the composition itself. That's the sketch that I'm basing, so that's what I'm using as a reference. Instead of painting outdoors, sometimes you can paint outdoors, you can take a canvas outside. Other times you just have that sketchbook in your pocket and then you can take it home and you can work from it at another time. It's really good to work from a sketch, from your own sketch. It is much preferable than working from a photo, because a photo will always demand that you copy every single detail off of it. Whereas when you work from a sketch, you already made some design decisions on the spot. You decided what is important, what is not, what should be a focal point. And here I'm going to turn that very wide, more than 3 times as wide as high composition from my sketchbook, which is a 2-page composition, and I'm going to have to transform that to fit the canvas. Now you see I carry on sketching out, working on the composition on the canvas, getting rid of all the white. It's basically this yellow base, yellow-orange base that will give the whole end result a summery feel. So the reason why I work with these yellow, orange, red colors is that a seascape is very blue, blue sky, blue sea, maybe a bit of a turquoise on it, the green grass, but essentially it's a very cool color combination that I will have to add as a top layer. If I have a nice, strong, warm base color beneath it all, that will warm up the overall feel. The overall atmosphere will be nice and warm and sunny. Now I'm beginning to add a bit of a white mixed in with previous colors. So most of the colors are still wet. You can see them flowing down the canvas, just to create some of the highlights. I'm adding the highlights, but if I left the canvas white, these would be still much darker than the original white of the canvas. As I work my way around the color wheel, what I also do is, and you will notice it all the way through, that once I work with a particular color, I make sure that I use it in a balanced way around the whole canvas. So I don't jump from one color to the next, to the next, to the next, and then go back and then go forth again. I work with one color at a time, and that keeps things a bit more coherent, more simple, and generally more balanced. Every time I stop, every time I step back from it, I judge for this overall balance of the one color that I'm working with and of the one color in combination and in relation to the other colors that are on the canvas. Now I begin to pick up some darker ones, and that's going to be my red. It's a very deep and not so saturated cadmium red that I'm working with. Of course, if you mix it up with white, you will get these lighter pinks, but essentially it gives me the opportunity to create depth because compared to those yellowish orangey washes of the first layer, this is going to be considerably darker. Now, the tools that I'm working with. What you don't really see in my hand, well, it is in my hand, but I haven't shown it to you, but it is a kitchen sponge. Once that kitchen sponge gets saturated with these yellows, reds, and if I want to pick up a different color, I will have to turn the sponge around and just use the other end. Another thing, every time you work on a seascape or painting a pond, anything with water and reflections, make sure that you add the reflection pretty much at the same go when you paint the subject that is above the reflection, that is being reflected. So at least add a couple of strokes like I did there with the red to signify and to remind yourself that you will have to, at some point, you will have to add reflections there. Now, as I work my way around my palette, I started picking up a little bit of the blue with my red sponge. So my sponge was still saturated with the red, and then I started picking up a bit of the blue that created that very dark aubergine, eggplant, dark purple that I used for some of the darker crevices of the rock, especially on this hillside that is closer to us. I didn't add anything very dark and very detailed in the back because you want to have that sense of things being further away, and anything that's far away enough, you don't see the details, and the darks are not so dark, the light bits are not so light. Now, working with that purple, then I moved on to more and more blue. So I started adding some darker blues, and once I was with that blue, I started picking up a bit of the white to mix it in, and now I'm adding the blue for the sea. That's actually the ocean. Now, what you see here is my homemade color wheel. These are not the colors I'm working with right now, but it's just a sample of how you create your own color wheel. Just using your finger, mix up the one that I'm holding is a primary color wheel of red, blue, and yellow, but the colors that I'm using, that I'm actually painting with, are not a primary red, but a deep cadmium. It's not a primary blue, but a phthalo blue, and it's not a primary yellow, but a darker and more transparent yellow. But whatever three colors you pick, it's worth doing this color wheel, and that gives you a full spectrum of the colors that you can create. Now, after having sketched, having added that base plan, which is slowly disappearing under my palette knife here, you want to pick up the colors that that will be on top. This is the first layer of palette knife strokes. I'm also trying to get rid of some of the previous structures underneath, which was sort of a floral design that I gessoed over and turned it upside down. But I'm also using those structures to create further texture in the painting. You can also see the way the yellow background is disappearing behind various types of cooler, pinky, bluey, turquoisey colors. It's not going to disappear completely, and depending on who you are and what your taste is, you can paint it over completely, or you can leave it in a very patchy, patterned way. You can leave that background color peeking through. You see the way I'm working with a flat palette. I have seen people try to work with watercolor palettes with those little wells. It is mighty difficult to work with a palette knife and pick the colors out of that. So the reason why I work with flat palettes is that you can actually pick up the whole of the paint, every single ounce of it, and use it. You can also clean the palette knife on the side, on the edge of the palette, because it's a straight edge. Now, as for straight edges, essentially a palette knife is a ruler that you are painting with. So you see me here placing that edge very carefully and then pulling it in a certain direction. Wherever you place the edge of the knife, it's going to be a straight edge. You can paint very nice straight clean edges by placing it there, and then the way you pull it up, you are going to run out of colors and it's going to be an abstract. The other edge, it's not really an edge, it's just an abstract pattern. Now I'm still working with the blue and I'm beginning to layer it around in other places. I can pick up a very thin layer of blue and spread it around on the hillside, or I can pick up a more thick layer and carefully layer it on the darker colors that I have put there, which are there. Basically, those previous sponge marks are essentially just placeholders. They remind me of how the final work should be, and also as I'm picking up that dark blue and dark purple that I have mixed now, depending on what I'm layering it on top of, that color, that same color, will have a very different conversation with a dark red underneath, which is what I'm using now, or a lighter highlight color, which is that pinkish white, or the yellow. So colors basically interact with each other very much like people do. Depending on who you meet, you will probably behave slightly differently, you will talk a little bit differently with different people in your life. The same way colors, when they interact, as you layer them one on top of the other, they will have a different sort of interaction with the colors beneath. Now that I'm adding the blue color for the ocean on top of the blue color that I had added with the sponge underneath, the contrast is less visible, but that's exactly what I wanted to have. You also see me pulling the paint down, and I strongly recommend, when you are painting water, when you pull the paint down on the canvas, then it is reminiscent of reflections of whatever is above it. And if you want to have a very nice and smooth water surface, you can pull the same paint horizontal, so sideways. You can do that as well. At this point, I'm still just adding the blue, and do you see also that every single time I pick up colors, it is going to be a slightly different mixture. I don't overmix the colors on my palette because I want to have variety on the canvas. If you overmix, if you create a too smooth of a mixture, like a nail polish consistency and smoothness, then you will have to work a lot harder to create texture and to create interest and variety in terms of color tones and color temperature, as well as saturation. As you work your way around the painting, you will be covering pretty much the previous, what you can call underpainting, what you did with a sponge. Some people might be working with a white brush on that. I don't mind using either one, but the whole point is that when you work on that initial sketch, now you begin to see why you don't have to pay attention to every single edge at that point. Because when you pick up the knife, that's when you start adding definition. That's when you create edges. That's when you have these very sharp contours and strong patterns that just draw the eye. Another thing about painting with the knife, if you are new to painting with a knife, it will take some time for you to get used to how to handle, how to turn it around, what directions you can pull things. And you can try working with larger knives like this one here. This is just in response to someone at my demo painting asking me about size of the knife, and I said, yeah, sure, you can paint with a larger one. And in fact, it is, I advise you to use a larger knife than what is comfortable. So if it's larger than comfortable, then it is probably the correct size. You can work your way down to smaller, thinner tools if you wish, but with a large knife, it is, you can create consistent pattern across a fairly large area. Now, of course, when you pick up the knife after painting with a brush or a sponge, you will be working with a lot more paint. You will also run out of paint very often. You need to replenish your colors on your palette. Now I'm working around the palette again. So having done what I could with the blue, I move on to turquoises and then finally greens, because there were some greens on this hillside. So I'm picking up the green, and as you see, I'm not overdoing it. I'm not over mixing the green. It's not one particular green. A word of warning about green: it is very, very easy to overdo the greens, and it's also very difficult to add the full variety of greens that we have in nature. So when your greens are too strong, too bold, too vibrant, then you can add a pinch of red, which is what I did here, and that will make your greens settle down a little bit, make them a little bit more, a bit browny green, a bit more, you know, like dried out grass would be on the seaside. And also I have a bit of a white in there. So just make sure that you have, if you paint anything that's green, just make sure you add enough variety. You go all the way from the yellow, preferably almost to a full blue, but at least a very, very strong turquoise, and have the lighter versions, the darker versions of it, just everything that you need. Now, I started pick up a bit more of the red. I came full circle. So the full circle means that I'm back to the reds. I'm adding a bit of a red for contrast. I'm adding a bit of a red for interest. And because this whole seascape in the end, it should not resemble the full original picture. If I make just a dull exact copy of what I'm looking at, it would be, I would consider it a failure. So you see I'm adding a bit of a darker patch there, darker greens, and then a bit of a stronger yellow, which will be a base, just a base layer for the sunshine later on. Now, anything you do, if you overdo it, which we all tend to do, we overdo, we love it, you know, we add a bit of a color, oh, I love that, and then you start adding it everywhere, and then all of a sudden it just loses its umph. Just somehow it's no longer as interesting as those first or second stroke was, which is fine. Yeah, you will do that a number of times. You can always add another layer. So with the knife and with acrylics, it really invites you to fiddle with it and add layers to it as you carry on the work. Now I'm adding a bit of a grass that has been growing in those crevices on the rock, you know, climbing down towards the ocean, and then some desaturated greens in the back there. Now, having done what I could with the palette knife, I have put the painting down on the floor on a plastic sheet, and I'm working on it, adding some layers with a very wide brush. I'm knocking back some of those strong textured blues on the sea, and I'm also getting ready for painting over this previous very choppy and strong and bold painting over them with acrylic inks. So wherever I feel like those previous layers were too strong, too harsh, or the colors were too saturated, I'm adding a bit of this white. It is preparation for what's coming next. The first color that I'm picking up is something called antelope brown, but it's not really a brown, it's a very desaturated dark green. When you work with acrylic inks, and you see I'm working with the original pipette that the ink comes with, you can draw with it. You can use the original fully saturated color. You can also dilute it and use like an old egg holder or something like that. I'm not talking about the paper one, but the one that possibly comes with a fridge. And you can add just a little bit of water and a bit of the color if you wish, though here I was working straight from the bottle. Then I started spraying a bit of water on top of that, on top of those lines, making them run, and adding that yellowy green as it runs together with the blue and creates some of those greeny turquoisey colors that you see in Cornwall when the tide comes in. Then I started, of course, adding a bit of water to the same dark green on the seashore. The reason is that those greens, however much I tried to tame them, they were still too harsh, too strong, just not muted enough. And I just wanted to get rid of some of those very harsh acrylic patterns that came from the previous painting sessions. By the way, if you're interested, all this has been over the course of 2 evenings. So it's an evening demonstration for an art club. And I painted for about 2.5, 3 hours total, with breaks in between. So everything, everywhere where I was just stopping and explaining, it's being cut out, and I'm just trying to focus on when things are actually happening. Now the second layer is this turquoisey blue that I'm adding, because the sea needed a little bit more blue. But also at the same time, when you are adding any color, make sure you look around your canvas and see if there is another place where so number one, does that color need balancing out? If it does, then how can you balance it out? like the turquoise blue on the water, on the sea, could be balanced out by a few spots of that same blue on the green mountains. And I did that. Then a little bit of this orange red to create that sun-baked effect. And don't be afraid of adding quirky colors where they supposedly don't belong, like here, these reddish spots in the water. They actually help me balance out all the reds in different other places. Besides, the whole seascape that I'm painting here, it was supposed to be a semi-abstract seascape. So I'm not doing a photorealistic painting exercise here. I'm not slaving away in front of a photo, and I'm referring back to my original study sketches, and what I want to achieve is an overall pleasing and balanced color combination that is recalling the colors of Cornwall on that particular sunny day. I really enjoy paintings when they are one way or another broken up from the tedious realistic version that they could go. You can always go that way, you can always add the photorealistic details. I like to avoid them, or if I manage to add them, then I try to delete them or break them up a little bit, because I personally am bored with photorealistic artworks. They are all way too easy to create. And I'm finding abstract quite a challenge, because when you are creating an abstract or semi-abstract painting, then you really have to make these decisions on what you keep, what you emphasize, and what you delete, or what you let run on the canvas. Here I'm bringing back a little bit of the edge there, adding more definition, and also breaking up again some of those previous patterns that were too obvious, too harsh. Just with the flat side of my brush, I'm making some of those colors run together. And indeed, they begin to resemble the hillside on top of the rocks in Cornwall. So I would say that's pretty much it. You can always fluff around, still add more details, go back on top of it while it's still wet. You can add more juicy liquid ink details, you can make them run, you can let them dry, you can add more texture on top of all that with more palette knife work. So you see, you can carry on working on it until you are essentially happy with the result. Make sure you do rest when you feel like you keep asking yourself, okay, what's next, what else do I need to do, I don't know what's wrong with it. I just feel like that's the time to take a break from it and come back to it another day when your mind has rested, because you are making a lot of decisions when you are painting. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe. You can also sign up to my newsletter, and then you will get notifications when I put up another video such as this. And have fun!